often think about that little boy with all these hopes and dreams and being a dad of an incredible 8-year-old son. It really makes me a lot more reflective about my own childhood and some of the things that I wish could have been different. On the outside looking in, I grew up in a family that looked like the model for middle class Black America. My dad was in the Air Force. My mother was primarily a homemaker. And so, on the outside looking in, it looked like all the things structurally were in place for a child to have a pleasant childhood. Unfortunately, my mother was very abusive physically. And my dad was complicit in the sense that he didn't, basically curtail that behavior in the household. And I was a sensitive child. And so I was deeply impacted by the things that happened to me, but also the things that happened to my older siblings. But in the midst of this, I remember dreams of being a doctor. And it wasn't until, decades later when I was in conversation with Oprah, as you mentioned, that I was able to get to the root cause of why I wanted to be a doctor. And it was based on my experience of how my mother was whenever she would take me to the doctor's office. And she was so pleasant and so kind and thoughtful. And I wanted her to treat me like that. And so that began this dream of being a doctor. And unfortunately, that dream really unraveled when my parents first, separated when I was about 11. And then they kind of did the dance of being back and forth together. And, they're together for months and then they're separated again. And then ultimately they divorced. And by the time they got to the stage of divorce, I was about 14 years old, 13 or 14. And the abuse in my household had became such that I decided to run away. And I honestly thought that I would be welcomed in with the love and support and care that I think all kids are deserving of by another family who could actually see me. And unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I was left very vulnerable and found myself seduced into the crack cocaine trade, which at that time was relatively new to Detroit. And, that's where the journey took this very ugly and sinister turn, because I found myself this innocent kid in this very adult, horrible subculture. I always reflect back to this time when I was in about the 6th grade and I went to school and I had physical welts on my arm. And I remember being very demonstrative because I wanted to bring attention to the teacher that something was happening, and unfortunately, the teacher either missed those cues or just outright ignored those cues. And from my experience as being a mentor inside high school, oftentimes I think those cues are ignored because the expectation from kids who come from, my community are such that oftentimes we're not met with compassion and empathy the way that other children are. And I wish we just had better structures in the school, since children spend a considerable amount of their time, their younger years in these school settings. But I also wish that there were more mental health options available at the time. My mother, who I now have a relationship with and who we get a chance to talk about these things, her upbringing was full of trauma and all of the things that she began to project onto her children. And so as a, thought evolved adult, it's easy to see that she was hurt during those times, and her way of managing her hurt was to hurt those she had given birth to. And I think that's an important thing. A lot of times in communities where there are emotional challenges or mental challenges, there oftentimes aren't the resources available to ensure that people are getting the treatment and support that they need.